A couple of years ago, I did a video here on YouTube all about professional football photography in the UK. And I thought I'd do an update for the 24-25 season, which we are now in. This video aims to be the complete matchday guide for photographing football, whether it's professional level or all the way down to a grassroots level, and everything you need to consider on matchday and before. Let's jump straight in. Now, before we even think about shooting a match, we have to talk preparation. This, of course, starts with accreditation, and you won't be able to attend certainly any professional match here in England or other professional leagues probably throughout the world if you don't have accreditation in place and match access for a particular game also agreed to in advance. This needs to be done probably a couple of weeks before, certainly at least a few days out from the fixture, and you need to provide confirmation back that you have got access to that particular game. Now, obviously, the Premier League, EFL Football League, and even the National League here in England all have accreditation processes in place. But even when you get down to a semi-pro level, and potentially some amateur clubs, depending on who they are and what kind of setup they have, there will be some sort of accreditation you need. It could be as simple as emailing or contacting the club ahead of time and making sure they're okay with you turning up to shoot. Whatever you do, do not just turn up to shoot and hope to get in on a day at any level, because that is probably not going to get you very far. Just the last point on getting your accreditation sorted as well. It's good practice to check for each game if parking is included in the accreditation, because if it isn't, you also need to make some plans and prep for where you're going to park, and that's when Google Street View and those types of things really come into their own. Next up is prepping and packing your gear, and this is a really important step to do ahead of time to just kind of relieve any potential for stress or pressure points on the morning of the event you're covering. Making sure that all of your gear is charged at the very least and packed away ready to go is really important. Now, for a Saturday 3 p.m. kickoff here in England, I might not finish some of that prep till Saturday morning if the team I'm covering are playing at home, which is a 20-minute drive from my front door. Ideally though, I do like to get it done earlier in the week, get everything charged, empty my memory cards and get them into the camera, and just give all the lenses a once over and make sure they're clean and ready for action. Having these things done as early as possible also leaves you better prepared should you get a call to suddenly cover a game in the days beforehand at really late notice. I've had this a couple of times in the past from other Football League games, amateur games, to even a Europa League quarter final with about 4 hours notice once from an agency as well. So these things do happen, and having your gear in a position where it's prepped and ready to just pick up and leave is a really good practice to get into. The memory card point, in terms of getting them wiped and inserted into your camera ready to use before you pack them, I find really helpful, because if you arrive at a game where you get stuck in traffic or things don't go as smoothly as you like, or something's happening as soon as you get there, it might be a new signing coming in or you arrive at the same time as the players, being able to just get that camera out, whip the lens covers off it and get shooting is really important. So if you can get your memory cards in and wiped and ready as well ahead of time, as well as your battery is charged, that is just going to make your life ever so slightly easier when you get to the stadium on match day. Prepping your laptop is also really important. My workflow right now is pretty simple, and most of the time I'm using only Lightroom and Dropbox and also WhatsApp on match day on my laptop. And so my prep, in addition to charging the laptop and making sure there's enough space on the hard drive and moving anything off there, like old games, if they're going to clog my memory up. The other thing I do is I create all my folders, I create my export, and if I am working for an agency as well, I'll also try and do as much of the kind of the code replacements and the setting up of IPTC metadata in Photo Mechanic before the game. Again, worst case scenario, you do that Saturday morning, but ideally you want to get all of this done as far in advance as possible. If you arrive at a game and you've not set your folders up, you've not maybe preloaded your software, if you're shooting for an agency and you haven't got squad lists written out and things like that, you're going to probably spend far too much time in your first hour or half hour you arrive at the stadium doing all that stuff that could have been done way in advance and saved you the stress when you get to the ground. So definitely setting your laptop up is as much a part of setting up and getting prepared for a game as your cameras and your lenses. Next is travelling to the game. Now, depending on who you are and what you're photographing or who you're photographing, your journey could be anything from a short walk to a multi-hour drive, or even a flight if you're covering European fixtures or overseas contests. Now, being well thought out and planned and having good time to make that journey is pretty important. And I know it's not always the situation we find ourselves in. I have had many a nightmare story from getting to games, including in COVID, during lockdown, despite leaving for a fixture down in Oxford, which is about 3 hours south of here, despite leaving probably 5.5 hours before kickoff, somehow the worst motorway in the UK was blocked, even during the lockdown, and I ended up arriving 10 minutes after kickoff. And by the time, while I captured the goal, by the time I'd set up my laptop and stuff, it was half time, to the point the club tweeted this. Yeah, don't let that happen to you, innit? Even though it was tongue-in-cheek and quite funny at the time, it's not something you ideally want to find yourself in the middle of. Now, when talking professional football, players will generally arrive at a stadium around an hour and a half before kickoff. So that being a 3 o'clock kickoff on a Saturday, expect them to arrive at about 1:30 in the afternoon, maybe a little bit before. And so when I'm going to games, I try to get there at least an hour and a half before the game when possible. If you don't know the stadium, it is well worth baking in extra time to your journey. And if you get there 2.5 hours early, that's absolutely fine. At Premier League level, I know photographers will get to the stadium maybe 4 hours before kickoff. That is because there's lines to get the best spot at pitch side and what have you. But definitely planning out your travel and knowing the benefits of getting there early and where you're going to park, etc. before you get there is really, really important. Arrival at the stadium. So upon arrival at the stadium, there's a few things you can get started on doing. And the most important, actually, is getting your accreditation to get into the game. Now, increasingly, where you collect your accreditation from and where you enter the stadium are two different locations, or that's what I'm finding increasingly to be the case over the last couple of years. You'll often collect your accreditation, your pass, which is normally a lanyard to go around your neck. You'd usually collect that from a reception or a ticket office or something like that, and then go around to a specific gate to gain entry into the stadium. Try and figure that out as early as possible, and if they are different locations, get your accreditation before we go on a little walk around and do what we're about to cover in a minute. Where you get your accreditation when you enter the stadium, it might be that you enter and then come back out and do these next opportunities that we're going to talk about. And that leads me on to exterior shots. So before actually going inside the stadium, there are a good few things you might want to shoot. Firstly, if you've arrived in time, which is usually around 1:15, 1:30 for 3 o'clock kickoff, as I've just said, then you could capture the players arriving. Home teams will generally arrive, probably League One level and below, certainly, and some Championship clubs. They'll arrive together in little groups normally, or individually, because they'll be driving to the game, parking the car, and then the player walks to the player's entrance. So that gives you maybe an opportunity to get some nice individual shots of them in the match day attire, walking and entering the player entrance. Away teams will almost exclusively arrive by team coach or bus, and so you can get some shots of them stepping off the bus or stepping into the player's entrance in more of a group or a line, if that's what you want to do. Those guys will also, if you want the photos of them with the big stupid headphones and little wash bags and all that under their arms, then when the away teams arrive is probably your best opportunity of getting those. It's also a good chance to have a walk around the outside of the stadium and see if there's any more external shots that might be nice to have. General views of the stadium, nearby artwork and murals, artistic takes on normal shots. Or at night, if you've got bad weather and the floodlights are on, sometimes from outside the stadium, you can get a nice little moody shot or a black and white shot perhaps of the floodlights, kind of capturing all the mist or the rain or whatever it is rolling in. Next up is our stadium entry, and we're going to need to make sure our lanyard with that accreditation, if you've already collected it, that is around your neck, visible and ready to go. Proceed to the entry point, and probably a case of having your bags ready to be checked. Now, of everyone watching this video, most of us, I'm guessing, are not shooting in the Premier League right now, and so chances of a bag search are probably lower down the Football League, less than 50-50. Not that many clubs seem to be doing it, but there are some every season that will. And this is when making sure that when you pack your gear, you've done it in a nice, organised way where you know where everything is. When you have security checks and bag checks, having all that just organised, you can flip your case or your bag open, you know where everything is. You can, if they ask to see your laptop, whatever, you know exactly where it is. Having those systems in place and being prepared in that way, this is one of the occasions that you'll be really happy that you've done that. Now, immediately upon entering the stadium, certainly if it's one you've not shot at before or for a long time, no matter what level you're shooting at, I think it's good practice to find out where you are and aren't allowed to sit or go. Can you change ends at half time? Can you pass across the front of the dugouts? Are you in front or behind the hoardings? Even finding out which way the home team usually shoots in each half is really useful, although obviously the coin toss can change that, and we'll come back to a tip on that in just a few minutes' time. A regular photographer, match day steward, the home team photographer, any of those types of people are really good to get this information off when you arrive at the ground. Equally, if it's not on your lanyard when you get your accreditation, now's a good time to find out what the Wi-Fi code is, in case, especially if you're in somewhere with poor mobile reception or with a big stadium capacity, which is going to hammer your 4G or 5G signal on your phone if you're tethering. Find out what that Wi-Fi code is nice and early so that you can get everything set up on your laptop, good to go after kickoff. As I've said before, I think being kind, courteous, professional at pitchside and in opposition stadiums, or in stadiums if you're not a club photographer, I guess every stadium is an opposition stadium, being all of those things is really, really important, not just because of how you want to be treated and how you treat others kind of influences that, but also you don't want to be a nuisance photographer who's getting in people's way, going against the rules and just being a bit of a pain in the backside. So make your own life easier, check things out as soon as you get in, and then you can crack on with what you're there to do. So we're in and we're settled, and now we're going to move on to our pre-match photos. So once you're in, it is time to grab those pre-match shots. General views of the stadium are a bit of a tap-in, and if you have a wide angle lens, do some of the usual. They're a bit boring, but they're also quite useful scene setting, so shoot from behind the corner flags maybe, shoot from behind the net, go into the net if possible, go up in the stands, try lots of different angles and be creative if you wish. Look for unique things to shoot as well. If you're shooting in the stadium with quite significant landmarks or a bit of history, an old stadium, then go and try and get some shots to convey the feel of that stadium. Beyond that, it's some early shots of the players. Now, if you get in quick enough, you might get the away team coming out as soon as they arrive, still in their tracksuits or whatever, normally with earphones in, having a read of the match programme, looking around the stadium. That generally is still a thing. If not, the next thing to look out for is warm-ups, a few nice close-ups of players, either kicking a ball or just kind of head and shoulder shots is quite useful. But same with the last shots I mentioned in terms of when they arrive in the tracksuits, they've kind of got a limited shelf life. If you're shooting for images that are going to go straight onto a social media account for the club, or they're going into a live feed somewhere, then these warm-up and pre-warm-up shots can be really useful. But beyond that, they're not that useful, I guess. So try and take a handful, but don't kind of flog yourself trying to do loads and loads. Also, try and be a little bit creative, because warm-up images, they are a little bit dull. So try different angles, get down on your knees and maybe shoot up with a wide angle. Silhouette some players against the sun. If I can find my examples, I'll drop them in here. If I haven't, it's because I can't find them. But yeah, try some different things just to grab a little variety of shots before warm-ups end. Okay, the match itself. So the teams are going to come out usually together side by side, and then they're going to do that handshake on the pitch. You can grab some shots of this, them coming out in single file next to each other is normally the best shot to get. Shots of them shaking hands in the middle. I've tried all sorts of different angles. I just don't think they're very interesting. They never get used, so get them if you want, but don't go out of your way to do so. If there is a team photo, if it's before a cup final or an international game maybe, then it's definitely worth getting one of those. But otherwise, attention can then turn towards the dugouts when the managers come out. So the technical areas, as long as you're allowed near them, I'd say don't stand in them. Even if no one stopped you, you're probably getting away and appear to be a little bit ignorant and rude if you do that. I normally stand just to the side of the dugout. get a few shots of the manager for the team I shoot for, and then if I can get handshakes between the managers, especially if there's any sort of history between them or the clubs, then that is often a nice thing to do as well. And getting those shots down by the technical area, that's another reason why doing those checks when you get into the stadium and find out where you're allowed is so important, because what you don't want is to start shooting the managers or be about to shoot the managers around the technical areas, the dugout, and a steward comes and moves you, because they'll be annoyed you're there. You're stressed then because you're getting moved on and not getting the shots you want, and it's just not a good start to the game. So find out if you're allowed to, if that's what you want to do, find out that you're allowed to do that when you get to the stadium. After that, it's time to head to your shooting position for the game. What I'll normally do is keep my gear close by when getting those manager shots, maybe 10, 15 yards away from the halfway line. This is so that if the team you're covering changes end as a result of the coin toss, as I say, you don't have to have half your gear at one end of the pitch and you at the other, or you go and sit with your gear covering the defence when you really want to be covering that team's attack at the other end. Lower down the pyramid, you can of course move around the pitch to kind of get your gear and move on. That's not always possible, and it's just not always practical. I remember, no word of a lie, I shot a game up at Scunthorpe United about 4 years ago, and you weren't allowed to cross the dugout at all, I don't think, or certainly once warm-up had finished, you weren't allowed to cross that dugout area. So I was near the dugouts for when the teams come out for managers, and then I was told that basically Tranmere would shoot a certain way, so the team I cover shoots to a certain goal. Tranmere won the toss, opted to turn around. I then had to go right around the entire perimeter of the pitch to get back to my shooting position, and in that time, in the first minute, Tranmere conceded a penalty, Scunthorpe scored, the game finished 1-0. I've missed the only goal, or certainly the cause of the penalty, because I'm 3/4 of the way around the pitch, walking around with my backpack and my case and my stool. So yeah, have a little think about those scenarios, where you're going to leave your gear, and just make sure you give yourself the best chance of getting settled as soon as the kickoff has taken place. Once a game kicks off, or once you reach your position, get yourself comfortable and set up as quickly as possible. But it is important to make sure that you are comfortable, because you want to make sure that you've got all the freedom of movement that you want. You want to make sure all your gear's within arm's length, if that's what you need, that your laptop's here. So make sure you're set up right. Try not to get too stressed and rushed if there's little hiccups along the way, like teams changing ends, where you're suddenly then trying to get ready when there's action coming towards you because the game's kicked off. So yeah, just make sure you do spend that time to make sure you're set up right, so that when those chances do come along, hopefully you are ready to go. Now, one of the best places to shoot, in my opinion, is off in the corner, kind of behind the goal. I think this is a great position for goals, for penalty area action, and of course those all-important celebrations after goals. The sideline is also a good option depending on where your preference is and what stadium you're shooting at. I recently posted a video here on YouTube all about different shooting positions, my preferences, my tips, etc. So check that out, it was within the last couple of weeks. And I'll try and post that video, link in the description below. Let's move on to post-game. So your work here is almost done, but not quite. This is a good time for you to edit any photos that you need to get off before you leave the stadium. So if you're shooting for an agency, for example, they might have given you a number of images you have to send during certain portions of the game. So it might be 5 before the game kicks off, 5 action shots by the half hour, 20, 30 shots by full time, or within 5 minutes of full time whistle. They're just numbers kind of plucked out of thin air. So if you have got things you need to edit there and then, carry on doing so as the players have left the pitch, because you should have a little bit of time to do so. So after the game, subs will now normally do at least a 10 or 15 minute warm down, or players that haven't been used will have to do a good 10-minute workout as well, running around the pitch, doing sprints, etc. And what this does is it buys you time. This didn't used to be as common maybe 10 years ago when I started out, but it's literally every single game I shoot now, even pre-season. Players will be doing warm downs with coaches after the game, and this gives you a nice little 10, 15, 20-minute window to carry on working before you kind of need to worry about getting out of the stadium. There's also going to be media interviews going on as well, so quite often floodlights and alike will be left on for for interviews to be conducted and finished off. Now, my one tip here will probably be, as soon as that full-time whistle goes, if you can, pack all of your gear up except your laptops. If you've got editing to do, leave your laptop out, take your memory cards out of your cameras, put them in your pockets. Don't put them down like I did at one point last season and lost them. Leave your laptop out, memory cards in your pocket, and pack all your camera gear up. And the reason I say that is some stadiums, some of them will shut the floodlights off very quickly indeed. Sometimes I've seen players still doing warm downs and maybe half of the stadium floodlights are shut off. What you don't want to happen or have happen is that you're in almost pitch black darkness with all your gear still laid out and you've still got to get it all back to the car. So pack your gear up as soon as you can. And then, you know what, if all the lights go off or a steward says you've got 30 seconds to leave before we lock the gate, all you have to do is slide your laptop away. You know you got your memory cards still in the pocket if they're not in your card reader, and you're away nice and clean without the panic of trying to pack up in the dark, which I've done so many times and it is not a fun experience, usually with a steward barking down your ear to hurry up because he wants to go home for his dinner. Last point, when leaving the stadium, you're probably going to need to return your lanyards. Each club is different, but most now do collect the lanyards in that your accreditation match pass came in. And also, if you've been given or issued with a high visibility bib or a bib of some sort to put on at pitch side, you will always need to hand those back on your way out as well. Many stadia record the numbers of the bib versus the photographer, so if you do end up with it at home, expect a phone call or a little invoice to arrive from the club wanting their bib back or payment for it. And that's it. Next job, leave the stadium and make your way home. Again, from experience, not really any tips here other than make sure you've packed up as much as possible before you get in the car. Obviously, you might do a little bit of wiring from the car, like this photo shows me trying to do in incredibly cramped conditions when it was very cold at a game I shot a few weeks ago. Check out my recent video of behind the scenes for that one. But yeah, certainly if you're shooting at night and the game is finishing into the night, get everything packed up as best you can, because what you don't want to do is get home at midnight or in the early hours of the morning and then have to somehow sort out packing your gear up, getting out of your car, taking it into your house, waking up the family, banging it around. What you want to do is lift it out in the bag or the case it's in, take it inside, pop it down and get up to bed as soon as possible. I hope that was useful. That's kind of what my match days look like right now. I hope that's offered you some tips, maybe a little bit of insight. And if you're due to maybe shoot your first game in the EFL or a professional stadium soon, I hope this video has helped, and best of luck to all of you who are out shooting anytime soon. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.